Through 8 weeks of the NFL season, Tyreek Hill is currently my NFL MVP. Unfortunately, a wide receiver has never won MVP, but if Tyreek can keep up his current pace and possibly break 2,000 yards receiving, he has a legitimate shot to become the first receiver to ever win the award. This past week, he became the first player to break 1,000 yards through the first 8 games of the NFL season, and if he keeps up this pace, he will break Calvin Johnson's record of 1,964 receiving yards in a season. Johnson averaged 122.8 yards per game that season, and Hill is currently averaging 126.8 per game, and also has an extra game to use with the NFL's new 17-game schedule. He's on pace for 2,154 yards this year, which would beat the record by nearly 200 yards. Tyreek also has 8 touchdowns through 8 games, and is on pace for a 17-touchdown season. Hill has even had a couple down games, recording 40 yards in week 2 and 58 yards in week 4, so his pace is very much sustainable even if he has a minor blip in the schedule in the next 9 weeks of the season. Stats are not even the only thing that makes Tyreek so dynamic. The Dolphins have utilized Tyreek Hill's speed to levels that we haven't seen before, putting him in motion and allowing him to get a running start off the line of scrimmage. The last non-quarterback to win MVP was Adrian Peterson in 2012, who put up over 2,000 yards and came up only a few yards short of breaking the all-time rushing record, and was the focal point of the Vikings offense and dragged them to wins throughout that whole season. He was far and away the most dynamic offensive player in the league that year, and Tyreek is that for the 2023 season. I think if Tyreek Hill could maintain his pace and even end up with just over 2,000 yards, along with 15 to 17 touchdowns by the end of the season, he will definitely receive votes for MVP if he doesn't outright win the award. For a non-quarterback to win NFL MVP, they have to do something that is either absurd and mind-boggling or break a major record. So if Tyreek Hill could get over 2,000 yards and break Calvin Johnson's record, he would automatically get MVP votes, because voters oftentimes, while it is a skewed system, look at stats and they don't take into account the actual dominance on the field. So if they look at the stats of Tyreek Hill and say, oh my goodness, he had 2,000 yards, and he broke the record, then that will automatically get him votes. And obviously breaking a historic NFL record, especially in a passing league, to break the receiving yards record is incredibly impressive and deserves a lot of attention from the media and from MVP voters. I think that breaking any record or putting up mind-boggling stats will have an effect on the MVP voters, obviously. So if TJ Watt were to break the single season sacks record, or someone was to break the rushing record this season, which doesn't look likely for a few more seasons, or Tyreek Hill was to put up the most receiving yards in NFL history, or someone was to break LaDainian Tomlinson's 32 touchdown record in a season, which seems a little bit unbreakable, but you get my drift. If one of these records were to be broken, or someone was to even come close to these records, then it would be hard for the voters to say that they were not deserving of an MVP, because all of these players were at least deserving of MVP votes. And to look at the records as a whole, if someone were to break a record, and not just a little obsolete record, but if someone were to break a receiving yards record, touchdowns record, sacks record, that is showing a display of dominance that has not been shown in any other season by any other player, especially if Tyreek Hill can break the record, as he's on pace to do, by almost 200 yards. If he can get to about 2,150 yards, I think there's no chance that you can't at least have him with some MVP votes, because of how historically dominant that season would be. Even with the extra game, that would still be far and away the record for receiving yards in a year, and the 17-game season is a new reality. So we have to look at it in the context of how historically dominant he has been in comparison to all-time wide receivers. Calvin Johnson is considered to be a top 3 at least receiver in NFL history, and if Tyreek Hill can come close to breaking his record, or break his record by 200 yards, for example, then he will definitely have to be considered for MVP because of how dominant that season would be. And once you watch the game tape, you realize that no team this season has really been able to stop Tyreek Hill completely. Even in the games where he had less yards than what he's used to, putting up 40 yards in week 2 and 58 yards in week 4, He's also put up over 100 yards 5 times and over 150 yards 4 times. And even in the 2 games where he was a little bit more down, his team still did well and still contributed. And within those games, he was being double covered, and he still had an impact on the game due to taking away coverage from other players. And even a 40-yard game and a 58-yard game are not bad. If he were to put up 58 yards every single game of the season, then he would still break 1,000 yards on the season. And he's also had 215 yards against my Chargers. He's had 157 yards on 9 catches against the Broncos. He's put up 181 against the Giants, 163 against the Panthers, and 112 against the Patriots last week. And for him to have 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns is super impressive as well, because you've seen so many receivers, even Julio Jones, have massive seasons when it comes to yards, but not be able to punch it into the end zone due to running backs getting the goal line touches and all of that kind of stuff. But if Tyreek can have 15 through 17 touchdowns, that is a dominant season scoring the football as well, because I would consider a good season for touchdowns for a wide receiver to be anywhere from 8 to 12. So if you're getting 15 through 17 touchdowns like he's on pace to do, that is incredibly impressive and honestly not out of the realm of possibility. So if you can put up monster stats in both touchdowns, catches, receiving yards, break the record in that, I don't think the MVP voters will have a choice other than to at least put him in the top 3, if not give him the award as a whole. One thing that bothers me about the NFL's MVP voters is that despite the name of the award, which is most valuable player, the value that a player provides to his team isn't even taken into consideration. Normally, it is just the best quarterback on the best team, and that has been the criteria for years, even before Adrian Peterson won MVP over 10 years ago. With Tyreek Hill, his value to the Dolphins is unmatched. Miami is sitting first in the AFC East with a 6-2 record, which is second best in the league. They have a good team, and Tua Tagovailoa has taken a step this year, but without Tyreek Hill, this offense would not be nearly as dynamic as it is. Hill is averaging 16.6 yards per reception on 61 receptions, and this is a high yards per catch on a high volume of receptions, and that is very impressive for the number 1 receiver on a team. He's the most valuable player on a team that is in contention to win their division and conference and has a chance to go to the Super Bowl, and this deserves MVP recognition. If Tyreek Hill does become the first player to ever record 2,000 receiving yards and has 15 to 17 touchdown receptions to go along with the record, it will be hard for voters to deny Tyreek the MVP award. He's a lock for Offensive Player of the Year, which has gone to a variety of different positions, mainly skill positions, throughout the past few years. But there's an inherent systemic issue with the MVP voting that might make it a lot more difficult for Tyreek to win MVP. If I had a mid-season MVP vote right now, it would definitely be Tyreek Hill, and it wouldn't be particularly close. Every other player, it seems like, even quarterbacks, have had poor games. And while Tyreek Hill has had some games that are below his certain average and standard, he hasn't been shut down in a game where he maybe has 2 catches for 13 yards or anything like that. Even Patrick Mahomes, this last week against Denver, had 2 picks and a fumble, and lost the game 24-9. Every single quarterback has had that one game where they've just struggled, and Tyreek Hill has not had a game where he looks particularly locked up or boxed, and that is something that must be taken into consideration for MVP, is that he has not missed a stride really throughout the first 8 games of the season. And I think that he is definitely deserving of at least a look for MVP, and we'll see how the rest of the season goes. I'm really hoping that he can get that record, get 2,000 yards, and break the record by a wide margin to solidify his place as the MVP frontrunner. Anyways, God bless you all. I hope you have an amazing day. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. I'm trying to hit 500 subscribers by the end of the year, so make sure to subscribe to the channel. God bless.